All right, the Wall Street Journal dropped an article that really made the rounds this week, not telling anyone anything they didn't already know, but forcing the reality to the surface in such a way that a lot of the people who have been propping up Joe Biden felt cornered and as if they had to respond. So let's see what they uncovered here or confirmed. During the 2020 presidential primary, Jill Biden campaigned so extensively across Iowa that she held events in more counties than her husband, a fact her press secretary at the time, Michael LaRosa, touted to a local reporter. I got to say, that's not a very sharp press secretary if you didn't immediately know that might not be a good thing to point out.
Right. Right.
Even then, as we will see, it was pretty clear his brain was melting.
Right.
His superior in the Biden campaign quickly chided him. As the three rode in a minivan through the state's cornfields, Anthony Bernal, then a deputy campaign manager and chief of staff to Jill Biden, pressed LaRosa to contact the reporter again and play down any comparison in campaign appearances between Joe Biden, then 77, and his wife, who is 8 years his junior. Her energetic schedule only highlighted her husband's more plodding pace, LaRosa recalls being told. And this is, remember, during the pandemic, he ran a basement campaign, and that was too much.
Right.
The message
Well, this would have been the primary, so this was a little before that phase of it, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, no. The primaries were still going on at the beginning of COVID.
Well,
Remember,
the end of it,
because
right,
they were getting slammed about
Super Tuesday,
holding events and that kind of.
So they were still going on. Right. Depends
They
on
were
how early
urging
on.
people to show up to vote at the same time that they were starting to lock down.
Right.
The message from Biden's team was clear. Quote, the more you talk her up, the more you make him look bad, LaRosa said. The small correction foreshadowed how Biden's closest aides and advisors would manage the limitations of the oldest president in U.S. history during his 4 years in office. To adapt the White House around the needs of a diminished leader, they told visitors to keep meetings focused. Interactions with senior Democratic lawmakers and some cabinet members, including powerful secretaries such as Defense's Lloyd Austin and Treasury's Janet Yellen, were infrequent or grew less frequent. Some legislative leaders had a hard time getting the president's ear at key moments, including ahead of the U.S.'s disastrous pullout from Afghanistan. Senior advisors were often put into roles that some administration officials and lawmakers thought Biden should occupy, with people such as, we've been saying this the whole time, Jake Sullivan's running the country, with people such as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, Senior Counselor Steve Ricchetti, and National Economic Council head Lael Brainerd and her predecessor frequently in the position of being go-betweens for the president. Press aides who compiled packages of news clips for Biden were told by senior staff to exclude negative stories about the president. The president wasn't talking to his own pollsters, as surveys showed him trailing in the 2024 race. Presidents always have gatekeepers, but in Biden's case, the walls around him were higher and the controls greater, according to Democratic lawmakers, donors, and aides who worked for Biden and other administrations. There were limits over who Biden spoke with, limits on what they said to him, and limits around the sources of information he consumed. Throughout his presidency, a small group of aides stuck close to Biden to assist him, especially when traveling or speaking to the public. Quote, they body him to such a degree, a person who witnessed it said, adding that the hand-holding is unlike anything other recent presidents have had. The White House operated this way, even as the president and his aides pressed forward with his re-election bid, which unraveled spectacularly after his halting performance in a June debate with Donald Trump made his mental acuity an insurmountable issue. Vice President Kamala Harris replaced him on the Democratic ticket and was decisively defeated by Trump in a shortened campaign, leaving Democrats to debate whether their chances were undercut by Biden's refusal to yield earlier. Now, this is something I'm going to say just based on the way things played out when they finally got him out. What choices was Biden making? It seems like the bunch of criminals around him were using him to stay in power. That's why they
Of
wanted to
course.
prop him up. It had nothing to do with him. These people were getting to run the country. He was the figurehead. He was a perfect figurehead. He didn't know what was going on.
Right. Right. I mean, the upshot of this article is basically that they knew long
Of
before
course they
the
knew.
2020 race that he couldn't do it. They knew he was the only one who could beat Bernie Sanders in a primary, and this is the extent they were willing to take it to make sure that Bernie
Right.
Sanders did not win that nomination.
Right.
This
If
is
you
the
said
extent. This is how
anything,
far they were
yeah.
willing to go. Yep.
You were ageist.
Right.
He had a stutter. Right.
Yeah.
Same exact people who 5 seconds before were pointing this out.
Right.
Right. They were pointing this out. This was which reporter was it? She actually went on and said that Joe Biden was mentally failing.
Yeah, I forget who. But this is, I heard somebody on Twitter compare this.
Cory Booker, Julian
Oh, yeah.
Castro.
That's right. Yeah, on the debate stage. That's right, Castro. He forgot what he just said. I heard someone on Twitter, I forget who it was. They said that this was as systemic a lie as the WMD lie. And you could debate which one is worse. I would debate the WMD lie is worse. But if you're a liberal and you think Trump is Hitler, you have to put this pretty close because it was this just systematic deception that got you where you are now, where Trump's taken office in less than a month.
I would say this is worse than WMD because I think at least some people parroting it believed it. I don't think anyone believed that Joe Biden was not non-compos mentis.
Fair enough.
This account of how the White House functioned with an aging leader at the top of its organizational chart is based on interviews with nearly 50 people, including those who participated in or had direct knowledge of the operations. Biden, now 82, has long operated with a tight-knit inner circle of advisors. The protective culture inside the White House was intensified because Biden started his presidency at the height of the COVID pandemic. His staff took great care to prevent him from catching the virus by limiting in-person interactions with him. But the shell constructed for the pandemic was never fully taken down, and his advanced age hardened it. The structure was also designed to prevent Biden, an undisciplined public speaker throughout his half-century political career, from making gaffes or missteps that could damage his image, create political headaches, or upset the world order. Yeah, tell the Russians the nukes are going to be here in 20 minutes.
Right.
The system put Biden at an unusual remove from cabinet secretaries, the chairs of congressional committees, and other high-ranking officials. It also insulated him from the scrutiny of the American public. The strategies to protect Biden largely worked until June 27th, when Biden stood on an Atlanta debate stage with Trump, searching for words and unable to complete his thoughts on live television. Much of the Democratic establishment had accepted the White House line that Biden was able to take the fight to Trump, even in the face of direct evidence to the contrary. The president's team of pollsters also had limited access to Biden, according to people familiar with the president's polling. The key advisors have famously had the president's ear in most past White Houses. During the 2020 campaign, Biden had calls with John Anzalone, his pollster, during which the two had detailed conversations. By the 2024 campaign, the pollsters weren't talking to the president about their findings and instead sent memos that went to top campaign staff. Biden's pollsters didn't meet with him in person and saw little evidence that the president was personally getting the data that they were sending him, according to the people. People close to the president said he relied on Mike Donnellan, one of Biden's core inner circle advisors. With a background in polling, Donnellan could sift through the information and present it to the president. Bates said that Biden stayed abreast of polling data. But this summer, Democratic insiders became alarmed by the way Biden described his own polling, publicly characterizing the race as a toss-up when polls released in the weeks after the disastrous June debate consistently showed Trump ahead. They worried he wasn't getting an unvarnished look at his standing in the race. All right, so they bullshitted him.
Well, yeah, and they especially bullshitted him because from what we're hearing, according to people who had, sources within the campaign like the PodSafe guys, they said that the internal polling for Biden versus Trump was actually worse than the public polling. It was worse than the polling we were seeing.
Right.
They were saying he was going to lose 40 states. Right. And so that told you they were just straight up lying to him.
Which, again, I think these people just wanted to run it because they wanted to stay in power. It wasn't
a huge opportunity.
It wasn't about keeping him in power. It was about keeping them in power. And I got to say, at one point, the reporter says most of the Democratic insiders accepted that Biden could take it to Trump. Okay, picking that apart, they thought whatever they were shooting him up with would get him through faking his way through this race the way he faked his way through the last one. There is no way that these insiders did not know Joe Biden's brain was melting.
Right.
Anyone could see it. We could see it. And we're not in Washington. We don't have access to the information that these people do. On July 13th, Biden held an uncomfortable call with a group of Democratic lawmakers called the New Democrat Coalition, aimed at reassuring them about his ability to stay in the race. The president told participants that polling showed he was doing fine. He became angry when challenged, according to lawmakers on the call. At one point, Biden looked up and abruptly told the group he had to go to church.
All right, I gotta go.
And Corn Pop was a bad dude.
I gotta go to church, Mr. President. It's Thursday. It's Thursday.
So I'm very religious.
Yeah.
Some lawmakers on the call believed that someone behind the camera was shutting it down. Biden dropped out of the race 8 days later. Now, nobody in the corporate media covered themselves in glory in the mysterious case of Joe Biden and his melting brain. But the clip that people really seem to be latching onto is Nicole Wallace assuring us that claims of Joe Biden's lack of mental competence was all a Republican scheme with their cheap fakes.
Growing and insidious trend in right-wing media, broadcast, print, and social media. It is to take highly misleading and selectively edited videos of President Biden directly from Republican National Committee social media accounts and then use those videos to spread messages virally to cast doubt on President Biden's fitness for office. Here is this headline from the New York Post, quote, Biden appears to freeze up, has to be led off stage by Obama at Megabucks LA fundraiser. The full video posted by Biden finance chair on Twitter shows something entirely different. Biden reacting to applause and then walking off stage with former President Obama. It comes less than 1 week after the New York Post made a cover out of another piece.
All right, so you get the idea. Now, Nicole Wallace is a very interesting person for them to be honing in on because this was so cringe that I remembered it. Nicole Wallace had one of the most uncomfortable interactions with Joe Biden, not in 2024, in March 2020. Some of you may remember this one.
Act like a president. That's a stupid way to say it.
You know, Donald Trump was asked on...
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, probably best I don't.
All right, let me ask you this.
I just can't figure the guy. It's like, I don't know, it's like watching a yo-yo. I shouldn't have said it that way. It's like watching.
It feels that way. I want to ask you.
It feels that way. She backs him up. Yes, and. Yeah, no, it does feel that way. It is like watching a yo-yo. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. That thing you just said that makes absolutely no sense. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I can see that. So if there's any reporter who had reason to know that Joe Biden had no business being anywhere near the White House except on a group tour, it was Nicole Wallace who conducted that really, really, really cringe interview. You want to talk about cringe. It was so cringe. I remembered it as soon as I saw the video of her talking about cheap.
I didn't remember that one.
Oh yeah, no, because that is literally you say the Chegg thing will literally make you cringe. Mm-hmm. This literally makes you cringe because she's a paid propagandist who has to pretend to be a journalist. What do you do when it's clear that this guy you're supposed to be propping up has half a brain missing?
Yeah. On top of that, like the delay in the video feed makes it even more awkward because she doesn't know when to start or when he's going to stop.
Just terrible. All right, so that was a little chestnut I wanted to share with you. So Lindy Lee, who now has declared her liberation from the Democratic Party, if I were a betting man, and I am, my money would be she's going to wind up on a Republican fundraising committee in the midterm cycle. But this is what she had to say about this.
Let's just be very honest what's happening here. The president has not been cognitively fit to assume the duties of the Oval Office for a number of years now, and it breaks my heart to say it, because I know President Biden, and I love the man, but he is in no shape or form able to carry out the duties that the commander-in-chief requires, and it's just devastating. And we saw that confirmed by the Wall Street Journal expose yesterday, and also many exposés in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, over and over again, how his inner circle is actively covering for him and stepping up to the plate because he simply cannot. And I hosted him on May 1st here in D.C. And I remember one of my family members saying, after interacting with President Biden, they said, oh, we're blank, we're effed.
Okay, so everybody knew. So you're telling me Pelosi didn't know. You're telling me all these media people didn't know. Lindy Lee knew. If Lindy Lee knew, everybody knew. Everybody with that kind of inside access knew. So, of course, the media... Some of them are playing it. We never said any of that, or some of them are trying to blame the White House. They were so crafty. How could we have known? So Chris Cillizza's bullshit here is pretty typical of what you're getting.
As a reporter, I have a confession to make. I should have pushed harder earlier for more information about Joe Biden's mental and physical well-being and any signs of decline. So let me explain.
Okay, so the next words out of your mouth are going to be, and that is why I am resigning from journalism, because clearly I'm not qualified to be sharing insights or takes with anyone after getting such an obvious story wrong. That's the next thing he's going to say, right?
Joe Biden was president from 2020 to 2024. I worked at CNN through 2022. During that time, the early part when I was at CNN, 2020 to 2022, Republicans would regularly ping me and say, "Why don't you?"
Now that's before they fired you for sucking too much for CNN.
Right.
You sucked too much for C-fucking-N-N.
Ask more questions to Joe Biden and how he's doing. He's 76, 77, 78-year-old man. And I would sort of brush them off because what I would say is, well, there's no obvious evidence that he's declining. Yeah, he moves a little slower. He talks.
We literally, in our opening song, have evidence that he was mentally declining.
Right.
There was no evidence. Yeah. You know the thing. I just showed the Nicole Wallace interview from March 2020. No evidence. Right. There was no evidence that there was anything wrong with him.
Looks a little slower, but there's no evidence that he's declining. And the White House and the people around Joe Biden were absolutely adamant that suggesting anything, asking the question about whether he was in some physical, mental, or both decline was offensive. How could you?
Okay, so I think this might be the problem. I think you've got a fundamental misunderstanding of what a fucking journalist does. You see, the aides, the people around Joe Biden, the people whose daily bowl of Horash depends on propping this guy up are going to bullshit you. You see, what a reporter does is fight back and refuse to accept the narrative they're trying to spin. That's your all of this seems to be some kind of attempt at a mea culpa combined with a justification, when really it's a confession of a media insider for why all of these people are so terrible at their job, and the fact that they don't do their job. The fact that you even think it's a justification to talk about how insistent the White House was that there was nothing wrong, as if that somehow vindicates you.
Right. The president's
well, they told me it was all okay.
Right, as if the president's inner circle should dictate the terms of your content as a journalist.
Right. Amazing.
It's age shaming, and I think that impacted me at some level.
So you sucked.
Well, I did ask the question.
You suck at your job.
Time of, not directly the White House, but aides and people around in that orbit. I didn't really push on it, if I'm being honest. Now, once I left CNN,
so you're gonna stop doing this,
a little bit more clear to me about Biden's age. I think I did write pretty regularly and talk pretty regularly about how I wasn't sure that this guy was up to it. And then obviously after the June 27th debate, everybody, including me, was writing and talking about it. The reason that
okay. So after it became completely obvious, and the establishment Democrats gave you all permission to go after him because they wanted him out the door, then you started talking about it. That is amazing that he would think, and it really is a confession. What's most remarkable about it is he doesn't realize the type of confession it is. That is really a confession for his entire generation of journalists and why they're so fucking terrible at their job. Because they think that the White House pushing back against them justifies not doing their job. Right. They are so ensconced in the psychology of access journalism that it doesn't occur to him that he's describing himself as an access journalist who can't be trusted to report reliably as a result.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Now, what I will say, if it makes him feel any better, is that one of the takeaways from the Wall Street Journal piece is that it was going to take Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and George Clooney to get Biden out of the race. Like, no amount of, journalistic exposure of his state was going to do it. They couldn't even get him out after the debate. It took a month.
Job.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying. It's not as if Biden would have responded to that. There was no getting him out of the race until the top dogs got him out of the race. That doesn't excuse him. I'm just saying it would not have made a difference. Biden would not have gotten out any sooner.
If the journalists had done their job, if they had really relentlessly reported the truth, the Democrats might not have even seen that as a viable scheme in 2020. It was already clear that he was in a state of mental decline. If the reporters had really, really done what reporters used to do at one time, where they were going after Edmund Muskie's drug addiction and things like that. Everyone thought Muskie was going to be the nominee until they started reporting on this. He might never have been the nominee.
Well, that goes back to what I said earlier, which is that the reason why they propped him up was because they knew that Bernie would win if they didn't. And ultimately, this was all about stopping him. That's what that was all about.
Which that wouldn't have been viable if they had done their job. They would have had to come up with something else.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Please clap.